Oh, we have some more chairs. I got to tell you, this, I got a big smile on my face because when it's 9 months before an election and I see all of you taking time out of your evenings to come here, that's what makes me the most hopeful candidate you've probably ever been in front of, I promise, because I'm going to tell you why I'm doing this, and of course it was for reasons you might suspect. And I'll tell you, I'm a lot more hopeful and happy and excited and optimistic than I've ever been since this journey began, in no small part to all of you. So thank you, most importantly. I spoke with Megan O'Hara, who's R.T. Ryback's wife, earlier today, and she said that she was, as a young woman, was a librarian in this very library. So a little bit of trivia for those who wanted to know. I'm Dean Phillips, if you didn't know that already. And I'm a father, and I'm an entrepreneur, and I love hockey, I love the Minnesota State Fair, I love Minnesota, and my next job is to be Eric Paulson's new employment coordinator. And I'm so glad you're all here. I think there's some familiar faces in the audience, some new ones. I think I'll tell you a little about me, where I come from, and why I'm doing this. But most importantly, because I believe that representation begins with listening, I want to know what's on your minds. I want to hear your thoughts, your ideas, criticisms, concerns, and most of all, what issues are most important to you. So that's what we're here for, and hopefully we can have a nice conversation. So my story begins on the day that Richard Nixon was inaugurated. I was born, January 20th, 1969. Yeah, so all you need to know, all you need to just draw an arc from that day to right now, and you know why I'm running for Congress. My parents, Dee Dee and Artie, met at St. Paul Central High School. Any St. Paulites in the room? Oh, one in the back. I love it. By the way, let me ask you one question before I actually get going. How many delegates in the room? Awesome. Thank you. How many first-time delegates? Even more awesome. Thank you. Thank you for your participation, everybody. Yeah, so my parents met at St. Paul Central in the early 1960s. My dad, Artie Heffer, grew up in, both my parents grew up in St. Paul. My dad, Artie, grew up quite poor. My grandma Ruth, his mom, was a single mother and worked at Kohl's department store in the Highland Village to make ends meet. And he went to the University of Minnesota on an ROTC scholarship, because it was the only way he could afford school. And was deployed to Vietnam before I was born, about 6 months before I was born. And he was killed in action when I was just 6 months old in July of 1969. He was a captain in the U.S. Army, and my mom was 24 and widowed, and we moved in with my great-grandparents in St. Paul for the first 3 years of my life. At which point my mom remarried, and a great blessing to me, a remarkable dad who adopted me, Eddie Phillips. And into an extraordinary family of great blessings and achievement and business success and philanthropy. And some of you might know my grandma, my adopted grandma, was Dear Abby, the advice columnist. Yeah. and her most important advice to me was, don't give advice. And I'll tell you a little story actually about her. But so when we moved to Edina when I was about 3 and a half. And that's where I was raised, and that was, I went to Edina Highland School at first, and I'll tell you, there's a story about her you might appreciate. 1980, John Anderson was a congressman from Illinois, a Republican congressman who ran for president, as you might imagine, or as you might remember, as an independent. And he came to my school assembly one morning and spoke. And I was, this is 1980, so I was 11 years old. And he really made an impact on me. He talked about the need for independence, independent thinking in Washington. And he talked about even money in politics. This is back in 1980. And that evening I went to dinner with 4 generations of my family, including my great-grandparents. And I sat next to my grandma Abby, who asked me about my day. And I said, you know, it was really cool. This man who's running for president came and spoke to our assembly. And she said, well, whoever it is not going to win if he's spending his time speaking to middle schoolers, which is... so, note to self, Mr. Cannon. And she said, before you continue, Dean, you know, are you a Democrat or Republican? I said, Grandma, I'm 11 years old. I don't even know what those are. And she said, you're a Democrat. So, if you're wondering, I was anointed a Democrat in 1980 in downtown Minneapolis at dinner with my grandma. Yeah. And so I grew up in Edina in a family that really valued hard work, taught me to judge people by the content of their character, not by the color of their skin, and taught me that success is to be measured not by how much we collect, rather by how much we share. And I did work hard. as a young guy and through high school. I bussed tables down at Runyon's, you know, Runyon's in downtown Minneapolis. Was a bar back and bussed tables. Sunday mornings, my job at Runyon's was to get up on a tall ladder, and if any of you have been there, you'll know they have about 150 framed photos and quotations on the wall. And my job was on Sunday mornings to get up on the ladder and clean every single one of those frames. Paul Runyon demanded clean picture frames. And I'll tell you, strangely enough, it was that experience that taught me not to smoke. Because every Sunday, 7 days would pass, and you would not imagine what I had to clean from those picture frames back in the era when you would smoke cigarettes in bars. So I worked there. I started a mobile car wash service in high school, which is a business I might have to return to if this doesn't work out so well. I worked at our family's business in the print shop for a couple of years as well. I went to school out east at Brown University in Providence, Rhode Island, and I never thought twice about coming home because I love it here. I love Minnesota. And came back home after graduating in 1991, and my first job was at a little startup company called In Motion. We made bicycle apparel and equipment in Edina. But my dream was to work for the family business, the Phillips distilling company. And when I joined the business, my first job was in the warehouse, picking orders. Second job was working in the production department, which was something right out of Laverne and Shirley, if you remember that show. And in fact, if any of you had a off-tasting Phillips peppermint schnapps bottle in the spring of 1993, that was my fault. Forgive me. And I worked my way up the ladder. I went to business school on the weekends as a younger guy and pursued my MBA, which I achieved. I was a young father at the time. I've got two teenage daughters now, 19 and 17 years old. And eventually managed the business. And I come from a family that taught me that business is a means to an end. And the end is not making as much money as you possibly can. The end is taking good care of people, the people that work with you and help create success. And equally importantly, the communities in which we do business. And that's a family principle. In fact, to this very day, I keep our 1941 Articles of Incorporation of our family businesses employee profit sharing plan on my desk as a reminder of what our first responsibility is as job creators and employers. And those are the principles that carried us into Talenti Gelato. Any of you enjoy Talenti? Yay! Oh, everybody does it with like shame. Favorite flavor? Vanilla hazel. Thank you. We sold Talenti to Unilever, the people that own Ben & Jerry's, about 2 years ago. And then more recently, I opened Penny's Coffee. One shop in Linden Hills and one shop in downtown Minneapolis. Some of you have asked, why are we serving Starbucks tonight? Because we're an equal opportunity campaign. I'm not ashamed to support any business. And at Penny's, it's another example of putting principles into play. We pay every single employee at Penny's a $15 minimum wage. Not because we have to, and not because it's easy, because it surely is not. It's actually really hard, especially when your competitors pay a little bit under $10 an hour. But it's the principle that counts, and we want to show other businesses that you can do well by doing well by people, the people that work for you. And it's not easy, but I think we're going to make it work, and that's just the way of how we do business. And as long as it's not my phone. So I'm going to turn up the clock to November of 2016. Anybody remember that month? It was a tough night, and I'm sure like most of you, if not all of you in the room, I was quite shocked and dismayed, concerned, and for the very first time that I can remember in my life, I was really afraid of the direction that our country had chosen to take. And I watched the returns that night with my daughters and my family, but particularly through their eyes as young women. And I saw the dismay that they felt. And I didn't sleep well that night, but I woke up in the morning and made breakfast for my girls. And over that breakfast table, I promised them I would do something. I didn't know what exactly at the time, but I promised them that I would turn that anxiety into action. And that's what I did. I started studying Eric Paulson's record. And it did not take very long to identify him as somebody who completely misrepresents himself. Someone who clearly started his career as a moderate. Someone who talks like Jim Ramstad and votes like Michelle Bachmann now. He's changed a lot over the years. I would imagine some of you in the room have voted for him. And I don't think you've changed. I think he's changed a lot over the last 10 years. And when he took the vote on the AHCA bill, the American Health Care Act, that would have served so many millions of people from the health care coverage, I thought that's it. That troubled me to the point of diving in. And as I say to many, I believe our Constitution anticipated a president like Donald Trump. I do not believe our Constitution anticipated a Congress filled with so many who lack courage. And Erik Paulson is the poster child for that lack of courage, inability or unwillingness to speak truth to power, puts his party over principle, and masquerades as a moderate by spending tens of millions of dollars over the last number of years, much of that from special interests and federal lobbyists and PACs, hiding behind a television screen. Won't hold town halls and doesn't show up in any public forum that's not scripted. Shows up in businesses and schools for photo ops. But I'm sure some of you have personal experiences of trying to meet our representative to no avail. And I will tell you right now, I do not intend to be the Democratic version of Erik Paulson. I want to represent an entire district. And that means opening my ears and my eyes up to everybody, not just those who might agree with my perspectives. In fact, one of the great beauties and joys of campaigning for this seat in this era are the stories and the ideas and the perspectives I get from people not like you in the room, from people who have very different political perspectives. But I want to tell you all right now that this campaign is not just about winning and being one of the 24 seats that flip in the House of Representatives. I want this to be something that transcends this race, and that is to encourage people to talk again. If I don't succeed in that, I will have failed, even if I win this race. I want people to talk, I want people to start conversations again. Everything we do, including this little truck, and it is very little. My 1960 International Harvester Metro van. Anybody know why it's 1960? Because that's the last year a Democrat served in this seat. And I drive this little truck around when she runs. It's my government repair truck. It doesn't say I'm a Democrat, it's just the government repair truck. And I have a service window on one side, I open it up, I serve hot coffee and cocoa in the winter and lemonade in the summer, and I invite people to come say hi and have conversations. And I hear from Democrats, and I hear from Republicans and independents and libertarians and every political perspective you could possibly imagine. And it has been eye-opening, very meaningful, and I've learned, it's the great epiphany, it's something you learn frankly in kindergarten. If you hear somebody, if you're willing to listen to them, it's amazing what you can accomplish. Make a human connection. And we live in a digital era that has a lot of great blessings in the age of technology, but it has really, really resulted in something that is quite troublesome, and that is we hide behind screens now. We spend all of our time communicating behind screens instead of face-to-face. And I want to come back a little bit to the analog era, the time when Minnesota politicians, Minnesota residents, elected officials spent time together. Might have had differences of opinions, but collaborated and debated and were thoughtful and got things done. And that's what this campaign is about. And we are succeeding because we have to invite people to conversation. And if you do nothing else after tonight, I ask you to make one point over the next number of weeks or months. Have a conversation with somebody who you think is going to see things awfully differently than you, and then see how it feels afterwards, after you hear them, and most importantly probably for you, after they hear you. That's how this country is going to be great again. And I'm going to make a claim, it's a bold one, but I think there is going to be quite a Trump legacy. But it's not the one that he thinks it's going to be. His legacy is people like me, people like you, thousands of others around the country standing up to participate in campaigns right now, millions of people who heretofore have never been engaged in politics, who are saying it's time to participate. And thank goodness we live in a country where we can do so. And it is not too late, but that's going to be the legacy. We have young people that started in Florida that said enough. The adults aren't taking care of business, and we're going to activate and energize this country, and they're doing it. And we have masses, millions of women saying enough of this, who are mobilizing and turning book clubs into huddles and joining into visible groups and showing up in ways that have never been seen before. And masses of people, just like myself, who said it is a responsibility to take care of the democracy. And that's what leaves me hopeful. So, what have I learned? I've driven thousands of miles and spent thousands of hours talking with people from every political perspective. And I'll tell you something really interesting. There's very little. I know the pundits would love to tell you that this country is terribly divided, and the center indeed has collapsed in Congress, there's no question. But it has not collapsed in America. Let me tell you, everybody, there is not anybody I've spoken with in this entire district over 10 months that doesn't want better public schools. There's not anybody I've spoken with that doesn't want cleaner air and cleaner water. There's not anybody I've spoken with that doesn't want better quality health care at a lower cost. There's not anybody I've spoken with who doesn't want safer streets and a safer country. Everybody. Yes, we might disagree a little bit on tactics, but boy, I'm going to keep reminding people every single day that there is a whole lot less that divides us. So let's take the power back into our own hands and tell people how things should be done, and let's change Congress this November. And I've learned a few things. And I'll tell you what's most important to me, and that's combined with just about everybody in this district. Healthcare. I believe it's time that this country makes the moral decision to afford healthcare to every single person. We are the only developed nation in this entire world that chooses not to. That chooses not to. And I think that should change. And this is the generation that can do so, at least begin the migration of doing so. The question is how to get it done. And I'm a strong advocate for beginning by the expansion of Medicare as an option for everybody in this country. And I say that as an option because I want to get things done. There are a lot of people, I speak with people every single day whose health care premiums, their insurance premiums, are increasing to points that are unsustainable, that are suffering right now. We got to fix the ACA. That's an absolute, because people are struggling right now. We have to expand Medicare as an option, and we got to make it a better option to compete with private plans. And the way to do so is to let Medicare negotiate prescription drug pricing. It's so sensical. We let the VA do it with great success. That will lower the cost for Medicare. We should also do something that nobody's talking about right now, which is the care delivery model in this country needs reformation. Right now, every health system in this country, for the most part, not every, but most, are only rewarded for hospitalizations and procedures. There is no incentives, very few that reward prevention and quality. So we have to completely switch the paradigm, which will reduce costs. We, right now, have mid-pack outcomes amongst the world, and yet we spend twice as much on healthcare as just about any other nation in the world, 18% of our economy. And we do, well, that's the case because of our incentive structure. And we also have to stop subsidizing the entire world's prescription drug pricing. It is nonsensical. Yes, the pharma industry needs profit incentives if we're going to keep creating life-saving drugs. There's no question. But it should not be only Americans' responsibility to subsidize that, as we do right now. So these are achievable changes because Republicans, for the most part, often agree with these notions. Preserving choice, you can have a private plan if you want, or a public plan, a good public plan. And that can be combined with more democratic notions of making sure everybody's covered. So I intend to be somebody who stops just dreaming and actually starts doing. And I think we can achieve that. I want to talk about public education. It's the single most important institution in this country. It's the most defining institution in this country. It's what separated us from so many others in the world. And we must re-elevate public education and recognize, too, that the profession of teaching is the most important profession, I would argue, in this entire country. And it's a responsibility of us to ensure that the public education system is financed enough, has the best teachers possible, and the most resources, the resources necessary not just to be a good education system, but world-class. Gun violence. You know, I made a promise to myself that after what happened last week in Florida, I'm not just going to occasionally talk about it when there's a shooting. I'm going to do it every single time that I can because it's enough already. Thoughts and prayers don't save lives, everybody. You know that. Action saves lives. Some of you may have seen, I, like many others now in this country, are calling for some very simple, achievable policy changes to at least reduce the incidence of gun violence, including background checks, comprehensive background checks, including reinstatement of the assault weapons ban, including mental health professionals in every single school in this country, not just because of gun violence, but because of human health for our children. And we need anti-bullying programs in every single school in this country. We need to allow the CDC to investigate why this is happening and, most importantly, make recommendations as to how we can solve it. That is what we do in America, and Congress has precluded them from doing so, which is appalling, and it has to change. Lastly, and no matter what your most important issue is, which I surely will respect, I hope your number 2 most important issue is campaign finance reform. Because if we do not reduce the influence of money in politics, nothing. Now, I'm not just talking about the NRA. I'm talking about every lobbyist organization, every vested interest. And the fact of the matter is kids don't have a union and advocates in Washington. And I want to be that person. That's why I don't take money from any special interest. I don't take money from any federal lobbyist, and I don't take any money from any PAC, corporate, union, or otherwise. Does anybody know how many members of Congress refuse those dollars out of 535?
534.
I wish it was 5, but it's because I could use one hand, but it's 6. Only 6 members of Congress, everybody, out of 535 refuse those dollars. And you think anything's going to change? No. We have to do it, and I'm going to bring it back to campaign finance reform every time I can. The environment, clean water, clean air. We have to transition from a fossil fuel economy into a renewable economy. And we can. We did not leave the Stone Age because we ran out of rocks. We left the Stone Age because we came up with better ideas. And we have those better ideas, and we're making progress. We have to continue it. We have to rejoin the international table, rejoin the Paris Climate Accord, not be the only country in the world, not because it's the end-all be-all, but because the United States of America should be at the forefront of such principled leadership, not behind, and certainly at the table. I want to talk about women's health and women's rights. You know, I remember as a little boy, my mother wore a little pin during the Equal Rights Amendment movement. And it's almost 40, it's not almost, it's over 40 years later, still hasn't been ratified. I am a passionate defender of women's rights, women's health, and pro-choice. I believe it's time, and especially as we recognize the year past, the importance of the Me Too movement, that we ratify the ERA, the Equal Rights Amendment. And women's economic security. You know, one of the only countries in the world, developed countries, that doesn't have a family leave policy. These are things that are simply inhumane for, I would argue, any country, particularly the United States of America. These are some of the things on my mind. But I wrap with campaign finance reform on a broad basis because it is the single most important issue that needs to be addressed, because no matter what we talk about tonight, no matter what we talk about, that has got to be our first step. It's foundational, it's corrupting. The United States of America is the most principled, I would argue the most principled country in the world, except when it comes to this. And the difference is we have legalized corruption when it comes to campaign finance. We have created an entire industry. The entire industry is dedicated to the relentless pursuit of dollars. And of course it's corrupting. Sometimes obvious and sometimes not so obvious. And I'll tell you, it's not just the money, everybody, it's the time. I bet it will embarrass elected officials if you knew that they spend 3 to 4 hours a day walking across the street on Capitol Hill to small call rooms and dialing for dollars. And you think they call people and ask for $5 at a time and have a nice conversation? No, they ask for $5,000 at a time, and they call their lobbyists, the same people that come into their office and help write legislation and ask them for their votes and then write them checks. And we think that's okay? No, it's not okay. And it's darn time that somebody addresses it. And I intend to be the loudest voice in Washington. If I accomplish nothing else in my lifetime, whether as an elected member of Congress or from the outside, I will do everything I can to expose this nonsensical corruption and get this democracy back on track. And I ask you to join me. Thank you. I think it's time for a national voting holiday, a federal national voting holiday. Where we take the day off, you bring your family, friends, loved ones, children, grandchildren, and express to them why civic engagement is so important. This is a country in which almost half of eligible voters chose to stay home in the last election, which I would argue was the second most consequential election of my lifetime. The most will be coming up this November, which is when we have the opportunity to flip the House of Representatives. And no matter which candidate you might support, surely I hope it's me in this race, but this is much more important than even in the 3rd District. This is about 24 seats in the U.S. House that will provide a check and balance on this administration. It's important, as you guys know, even better than I do in some cases, that we affect that change. And that's why this race is so darn important. That's why I'm in it. I want to be one of those 24 in this election, period. And if we do so, we will begin getting this country back on the track that I believe most of you in this room want to see. So with that, I will close by letting you know that to that end, we got to win this race. And Eric Paulson has been at this for 30 years, served 5 terms in Congress. But I got some good news for you, everybody. There have been 2 polls that have come out in the last 10 months, one just last week. Both of them show me beating him in a head-to-head match. There's 3 points ahead of him in the last poll that just came out. We have raised more money than any congressional challenger campaign has raised in Minnesota history to this very date, now over $1.3 million, only from individuals, only from people who can vote, because I don't take money from those other organizations or lobbyists. And I wish money didn't matter so much, but all of you know it does. And you gotta play by the rules until you can change them, and boy, do I intend to try to change them. We've got 400 and some active volunteers. We've received contributions from over 4,000 people. We've got the most extraordinary campaign team that I think has ever been assembled in the state of Minnesota. I've helped build some organizations over the years, been part of many. I've never been more excited about the family of extraordinary people that are running this campaign. Passionate, energetic, from here, from around the world, with ideas, passion, and a desire to see the same change that we all want in a very heartfelt way. So I think we're going to get this done, everybody, but I need your help, and I'd be so grateful for your advocacy, for your questions, your ideas, and your participation. No matter what your talent is, and everybody has one in this room, there is a role for you. And I want you all to look back, as I will someday, and recognize this may have been the most important year of our lives, for ourselves and for future generations. So thank you, most of all, for being here. And I'm going to tell you one more time. I started this out of anxiety. The worst day, perhaps, of my adult life was waking up that next morning. But I am the most hopeful, optimistic, smiling ear-to-ear candidate you've ever seen, because I see every single day in this district possibility. And I am hopeful, I'm optimistic, and I ask if you, nothing else tonight, leave a little bit more hopeful than you came in. I promise you, what I'm seeing would generate that in you if you had the chance to see what I'm doing too. That's why I'd love to have you come along for the ride, because it's fun, and it's the most joyful pursuit of my life. So thank you. I would love to open it up now to questions, and we've got about a half hour, so let's do it. Yes?
What do the Democrats do wrong? Because, you know, they're rational, they make sense. If the Republicans come in, they're down and dirty, they instill fear and government control. Those are the two things that everybody's afraid of. How can we overcome that?
So the question is, what do Democrats do wrong?
Yeah.
How much time do we have? I say that tongue in cheek, but the truth is, everybody, every organization, whether it's a political party, a business, a nonprofit, a union, a company, it all starts with leadership. A well-led organization or institution is a well-led institution or organization. I would argue that the Democratic Party is in need of some new leadership, to be forthright. I think there's a new generation running for office right now, like myself. There's some wonderful members of Congress right now, Democrats, who I think are extraordinarily talented and make me very hopeful. And I think we're going to see some big change. And I think that's part of the Trump legacy, is people saying, wow, we have a problem here, and it's my responsibility to step up and serve. I think the Democratic Party needs some principles by which it adheres, and I think that starts with truth, I think it starts with justice, and I think it starts with opportunity for all. Those should be the core values, I believe, of the Democratic Party. And in the words of Hubert Humphrey, who said the moral test of a government should be how it treats those in the dawn of life, and in the twilight of life, and in the shadows of life. That is what being a Democrat in my mind means. And all is not lost. But I think Democrats have too often, and we like to carry banners and wave flags, and that we're passionate. But we have to have strategies to drive these interests. And if we're going to achieve these outcomes, they don't happen easily. We have an entire system of governance designed to prevent change from happening easily. And that means methodologies and strategies to accomplish what we want to accomplish. And that means things can't get done overnight. But we can begin the change this November and take some big steps, and I'm very hopeful. But it does begin with some leadership changes, and I'm an advocate for that. Yes? Oh, yeah.
Oh, just real quick, we got some people out there who will have a hard time hearing. Can we
Oh,
bring them in and put them on that
please.
side?
Yeah, come
All
and
right.
join me.
Yeah, if you're outside the door, come on in. We're going to go to that side, and Nate, you're going to move this for a second for us.
Okay, no problem.
Yeah, come on over. Thank you so much. Also, just in case anyone's wondering, we have some cameras running. This is our campaign one. We have a Republican tracker. And are you a tracker as well from the Republican Party? All right. We're famous now.
Here we go, Nate. Welcome, everybody. Yeah, just so you all know, Nate films, he sends his tapes into the Republican Congressional Campaign Committee because they like to see what we're up to. And he's a good man, he's doing his job, and but just so you know why that camera's there. Okay, so question.
I just want to let you know why I'm here for you tonight.
Thank you.
I had become increasingly frustrated with the lack of town halls in the 3rd district. And I voted for Jim Ramstad until he retired. But, years and years go by without any, so I stopped into Mr. Paulson's office and spoke to one of his staffers. And I said that I felt that one of the biggest responsibilities of an elected official is to be available to their constituents. And I said the fact that he refuses to do so leads me to believe that it's either arrogance or cowardice. And I'm a retired firefighter and EMT. And if I can find it within myself to go into a burning house, he can stand in front of his constituents for a couple hours to
Darn
listen to
right.
what they have to
Darn
say.
right.
It makes me sad.
Thank you. Did everybody hear that? I hear from, what you just told me, I hear from I can't even count how many people tell me the same thing, trying to reach him, unable to. You know, if there's one responsibility of being a member of the United States Congress, it is to appear in front of the people that you represent, plain and simple. Is it fun to have people who disagree with you express that in a public forum? No. But is it a responsibility? Yes, it's a responsibility. It's not a and again, these are lessons you learn in kindergarten, showing up, listening, and as you all know, the longer you go without doing so, the harder it gets. And we're past the point of, I think, returning for them. First of all, I love getting in front of people and hearing what's on everybody's mind, and I've promised to do at least 4 open, publicized town halls for everybody to attend should I be elected to Congress in different parts of the district, because that's how this should work. You shouldn't just raise millions of dollars and advertise on television and hope you keep winning elections. Or at least we shouldn't allow that. We have to tell our friends and neighbors, both those who are Democrats, Independents, Republicans, to at least hold members of Congress accountable no matter what party they represent. And don't let them hide behind TV screens. So thank you for sharing that. And boy, I will do this very differently for anybody who seeks a time or a question of their representative, no matter what their political perspective.
And I'm able to stand, and I didn't notice everybody back here, so I'm gonna stand up if somebody needs a chair. I'd be glad to
Yes.
swap that out. I didn't even notice everybody.
Happy to have you here.
I'm happy to be here.
I think we have a beautiful country.
Yes.
I think we have a beautiful world, and I, quite frankly, third world. And so one of the things I've been spending more time looking at is the carbon fee, and the return to the people of that carbon fee. Have you some thoughts about that, and where you would be with that?
Yeah, so I'm very focused right now on converting big ideas into actionable, policy prescriptions, if you will. And we have to migrate from a fossil fuel economy into a renewable economy. And production tax, so my focus right now, to be forthright, is production tax credits. I just met with the leadership of Excel Energy last week to understand how they make business decisions. And as you might know, not just out of principle, because of economic decisions, they're decommissioning 2 coal plants right now in Minnesota. And they're making massive investments in solar and wind energy because of tax credits. And I think that's the most effective way, those credits, to incentivize the investments we need to provide more energy from renewables. And Excel thinks they might get up to 60% renewables by 2030, which is an extraordinary achievement. And I remind all of you, and I don't often do this, but Governor Valenti actually signed legislation in 2007 to begin migrating us to a renewable energy state, and we're making progress. And there are states like Iowa and California, many others around the country that are taking bold steps in that direction. What troubles me about the Trump administration is the uncertainty. The uncertainty relative to these tax credits means that massive enterprises on whom we rely for our energy production have to know that there's certainty, or else they can't make these multi-billion-dollar investments. So the evidence indicates that is the most impactful, immediate way to affect change in energy production, especially relative to renewables. And that's my focus. Relative to carbon, we are migrating now to transportation modes that were inconceivable just a generation ago. Driverless cars, driverless trucks. And I'm a big proponent of high-speed rail. We're one of the only developed countries in the world that doesn't have it. And if you quantify the amount of carbon produced by one flight to Chicago from MSP versus a high-speed rail trip to Chicago, it is about 1/3. So we can make some investment, we can make substantial progress by and create great jobs and great flexibility and great options for people by making these investments. So my focus in the near term is on doing this, going with what's working, and I think we can make some great progress in doing so. Yeah.
Healthcare, are you talking about Medicare for all, and what's your strategy to get to where we need
Yes.
to
The
be?
question is, am I for Medicare for all? I am for Medicare for all as an option to complement plans that any of you might be on right now through employers or through unions, whatever it might be, because I'm focused on what can be achieved. And Medicare for all as an option should be a good option that people can choose. And think about this as analogous to our education system. We have a public education system that should be our foremost priority. In most cases provides good education to kids. We have great disparities, of course, but in general, you have a public option. And we also afford choices to families in this country. If you want to send your child to a parochial school or a charter school or a private school, you can do that too. That is how this country works. And I believe we should learn some lessons and apply those in healthcare right now to begin a migration so that everybody in this country can have healthcare when they need it, no matter their age, income, geography, or condition. And Medicare as an option for people like me that would buy into it. If it was a robust plan, because it negotiated pharmaceutical pricing, which would reduce costs and didn't have profit motives, I think it'll be robust, and then people can choose if it's the right thing for them. But the notion of a wholesale dismantling of the entire existing insurance market is simply not achievable, everybody. It's simply not achievable. And we can start talking about it if we wish, but people are struggling now, and I think we can take some steps in a bipartisan fashion that we can achieve. And I remind you, we have a Republican in the White House, a Republican-controlled Senate, a Republican-controlled House, and I would argue the judiciary is, of course, conservative, and they couldn't even repeal the existing healthcare framework. So let's be mindful of truth and what we can achieve and how we begin a migration, because the outcome is what I care about. The tactics we can negotiate, there's all kinds of ideas, but the outcome is healthcare for everybody. And too many people are one illness away from bankruptcy. And there are too many people who don't have healthcare. And of course, this tax bill eliminated the individual mandate, which is only going to increase rates for everybody in this room, as we all know. So that's why I'm a fan of Medicare for all as an option to buy into, create a robust system that will become a self-fulfilling prophecy if it works well. People will choose it, and I think that's how America can get this done. Yes.
Yeah, I'm concerned about supporting public education. When you allow vouchers, you see what happened in the South.
Yeah.
You have now separate schools, and it's just as segregated as it was before, and the public is paying people who are poor for those vouchers. And I don't think that's a good system. It should be the public sector first.
Agreed.
And
I'm opposed to vouchers. I'm in favor of choices. I think the more choices people have to make for their families or children is a good thing. I'm opposed to vouchers. Our first and foremost priority has to be strong, not just strong public education, everybody, world class, the best. And we got to start employing 21st century methods to teach kids, not 19th and 20th century. And we have to elevate the most important profession in this country, teaching. With compensation, esteem, we got to find young people who have the talent and the interest to become educators, to put them on that track at a younger age. We have to recognize that everybody in this room who lives in the 3rd District, although a couple of you had the boldness to tell me you don't live in the 3rd District, we have to make up $147 million a year in unfunded federal mandates. $147 million that the federal government should be sending our way that we have to make up, that precludes us from hiring more teachers. And as you all know, yes, we have some beautiful school buildings in the 3rd District, but extraordinary teachers are what make the difference. And we need more extraordinary teachers and support services, including mental health services. And we have to make up that $147 million every year. I would fight for that, the IDEA funding, the special needs funding, immediately. It's nonsensical. And furthermore, this tax bill, by the way, everybody, is only going to send more money to Washington, D.C. that we will not get back, putting us further down the list of the 50 states. Right now, we're 44th. You know, we subsidize a lot of this country, everybody. And it's time that we have a delegation representing us in Washington that brings some of that back home, because we deserve it. And I hear you. I will tell you also, I spoke to a woman on the phone just yesterday who's actually a delegate. She's a grandmother who raised 2 kids, 3 kids, I think, 2 of whom went to charter schools, who she said those 2 charter schools, for different reasons, saved her grandkids' lives. And I think we have to be mindful of every family, every child has different needs, different opportunities, and we should not totally dismiss some of those choices. But charter schools should be held to the same standards of accountability and transparency. Some of you might know in Minnesota, charter schools are public schools, but they should be subject to the same standards. And first and foremost, public education. Yes? Yes?
Can you tell me please what your attitude and thoughts is on the deficit and how you think we should look at that going forward over the next several years?
Well, I'm not a math guy, but our current representative claims to be. And the math I did indicates we're gonna have about $1 trillion to $1.5 trillion extra dollars on our national credit card because of this tax bill. And for someone who had, talk about hypocrisy, for someone who has made his career out of advocating for balanced budgets and reducing our deficit, both at a state level and national level, it's appalling. And this tax bill, as you all know, did some things that I support. I do think that it was important that this country have a corporate tax rate that is at least competitive with the rest of the world. I do think that was important. But it left, it sends so much of the benefit to people who do not need it, and so little of it in relative terms to people who really do, that I'm appalled by that. And I'm appalled that we did so using a credit card on top of it. There's no way we can achieve the growth rates necessary to make this tax bill work. And I'm very, very disappointed in it. And any politician or candidate who says that he or she can actually balance this country's budget easily is lying to you, because it is awfully complicated, and that's truth. But we can start taking steps to recapture, balanced budget notions and take steps to get this under control. But I'm afraid that now the Republican Party is going to say, well, now we have these ballooning deficits and we have to cut programs. And they're going to call them entitlement programs, including your Social Security, which is not an entitlement. That's your money. So we have to be mindful of what is likely to happen. And I think we should run our government the way we run our households. Having some debt is not a bad thing. It's actually smart in most cases. And thank goodness we live in a low interest rate environment right now, because if we see rates spike, anybody who lived through the 1980s is going to remember, a lot of our federal budget would be dedicated to covering the interest on that debt, and that is deeply troublesome. So yeah, we need some more math people in Washington, not the one with the calculator meetings. I'm dismayed. I'm dismayed and concerned for my children and their generation, because they're going to be having to reckon with something awfully difficult if we don't get it under control.
Do you think raising taxes may be part of that plan?
Of getting that under control?
Yes.
Not necessarily.
Okay.
Not necessarily. Yes, in the back.
If you, because you might have to compromise with the other side to get legislation passed, what programs are in your mind, bloated or in need of some revision or, a second look at? What would you put on that list in order to compromise a little?
You're talking about and getting the deficits under control?
Well, actually, I'm okay with any answer, really.
Well,
I'm kind of curious what's on your mind.
I'll tell you
things
something.
that the government
Let me start with something that is, I'm sure you'll all agree with, our military budget. Okay? It's massive. It is, I don't know the statistics specifically, but you can add up a number of the other largest countries in the world, and that doesn't even in aggregate meet our military budget. And we need a strong national defense. We also need a 21st century fighting force to address the needs that militaries need in this day and age. But I'll tell you, as a Gold Star son and someone who lost his dad in the Vietnam War, I find it really troubling that we can always find the money to go to war, whenever we need to, no matter what circumstances, but somehow we can't find the resources to take care of people when they come home. And that troubles me. And when I look at how much need we have in this very country, blocks from here, miles from here, on both coasts and everything in between, and how much we spend on our military and somehow cannot take care of people here, not to mention provide health care, I would start there. I think that's, and I'm not talking about wholesale cuts, but I'm talking about a thoughtful discussion, because Republicans represent districts that are struggling too, and people having the same challenges, just as Democrats do. And this is all about priorities. If you look at the budget that President Trump presented, it shows his philosophy, his principles based on the budget. And I think it's time for this country to start having a hard look at it. And I encourage all of you to look at our federal budget. It's massive. It's no surprise. It's hard to understand. I understand why it's so hard for Congress to get their heads around it. But when you look at the line items of expenses, I would argue that that's where we start, is identify how we're spending our military dollars. And we are also, I should elevate this, this administration is essentially dismantling the State Department as we speak. And I would argue that, you know, for every dollar that we withdraw from diplomacy, we're gonna have to spend 3 more on bullets, which will only make this military budget grow. And we also have a Congress that often lets the military know what they need, instead of the military letting Congress know what they need. And I think you understand why that works. So that's a beginning point. But like I said, this is complicated stuff. And we have to start taking some babies. First, we have to win in November. And then we can start taking some steps back to regular order and decency when it comes to our budget and elsewhere.
Do you have any advice for severe introverts to get more involved?
Like this one? Yeah, you know, the question is how can severe introverts get involved? But the question is, every one of you in this room, I know, has something that would add great value to this campaign. Either some policy ideas from your experience, nurses in the room, educators in the room, scientists in the room, firefighters in the room. I need ideas. That's one way to get involved. And I'm easy to reach, dean@phillipsforcongress.org. Okay, I see it, my team sees it. If I don't get back to you right away, I promise you somebody will. Send me your ideas, send me articles, send me perspectives, criticisms. That's one way to help. We are developing an extraordinary family of volunteers that do everything from writing cards to picking up the phone and calling people, door knocking. You can imagine all kinds of work. We could use you in that capacity. I'll tell you what's most important is advocacy. Talking to friends, family, you know, business, work associates, that makes a big difference. And equally so, you know, I know in the reputation in political fundraising is that these are done only in corporate boardrooms and in country clubs and fine living rooms and the like. And there's a lot of truth to that, because that's why campaign finance is out of control in this country. But if any of you want to gather some people around a kitchen table or your own living room, I want to show up. I don't care if it's 6 people or a dozen, I can't be at everyone, but I love that. And if you want to gather some people, particularly people who may not see things the same way you do, that would be the greatest blessing to me, it'll be the greatest blessing to us, and it'll be the greatest blessing to this country if we can get people to sit down in a living room and talk. So if you want to do that for this campaign, that would be awesome too. And once we get this thing going, should I be the endorsed candidate after April 14th, it's going to take a village. And we're going to have all kinds of fun ways to get involved. And like I say, you know, we are going to get it done, and we're going to have fun. Everything we do on this campaign is fun. That's why I've got an ice shack on Lake Minnetonka right now, that we host people for coffee and conversation. That's why I've got the truck. We've got some other fun things planned for the summer, and we'd love to have you along for the ride. And just, I've got, let's see, Jens is in the back of the room, who is our organizer for this district. Visit with him afterwards. I hope he brought a lot of business cards tonight. But share with him whatever your interests are. We're not going to tell you what to do. You tell us what interests you or how you'd like to help this campaign, and we'll find a way to accommodate it. Yeah.
Yeah, the Supreme Court recently heard a case that has the potential of destroying public sector unions.
Mm-hmm.
Can you talk a little bit about your support?
Yeah, right to work.
Unions?
Yeah. I have received the endorsements now of the Minnesota Building Trades, Education Minnesota, the IBEW, the International Brotherhood of Electric Workers, and I've learned a lot in the last number of months, and have come to a much more elevated appreciation for organized labor in this country. And I believe that I have a responsibility to educate broad swaths of this country who completely underestimate the importance of labor. And the training facilities that I have toured are world-class, extraordinary, and must be elevated and disseminated and shared. All of the pending legislation you're talking about, I'm on the side of labor, because I believe that this country was built, thank goodness, for organized labor and the right to organize. And if we don't maintain that, if anything, protect it and expand it, we have done this country a great disservice, because that is the most important part of achieving thoughtful benefits, thoughtful compensation, and protections for people. And that has to be elevated, and I intend to do so. And I'm a business person, You know, there are not many business people who are Democrats. But I'm out to show this country that you can be pro-business and pro-labor, that they are not mutually exclusive. So, you know, Davis-Bacon, right to work, you know, these are issues I ask you to investigate on your own too and recognize, because unfortunately, a lot of these are just little news clips in the paper and people don't even understand how important these issues really are. And there's a case pending in the Supreme Court right now that can be quite destructive for organized labor, and that's troublesome to me, because I do think it's a very important part of this country's success. And I will also say this too, just as a well-led, thoughtful, principled business leader can do wonderful things for communities and for employees, the same is true in organized labor. Well-led organizations, well-led unions make a big difference. So this focus on leadership, this question came up earlier, we should demand good, principled leadership in unions, in organizations, in governance, in government, and in companies, and take egos out of it, and we're going to find a lot more common ground. In the back.
I have first of all, I want to say your daughter stopped in her caucus.
Oh, they're probably better than me. We send my daughter Pia to places where it's really important. I go to second.
But you were talking about advocacy, so I have a little, probably nobody else here knows about it or cares about it, but it's a little issue that's going on with CMS right now, and we're doing remotes, and I can give you some homework for your staff.
Please do.
What they're looking at right now is redefining, you're talking about quality healthcare and quality leaders. They're redefining, I work in the laboratory, and who can supervise the laboratories, and they're redefining that a nurse can now supervise the laboratories, and assess competencies and all of that. A nursing degree is not comparable to a laboratory science degree, and they have less than a quarter of the science that we have. Nurses aren't going to want laboratory technologists directing them and telling them how to care for a patient, you know, but they're totally different fields of science. And so our organization is trying to, they're working with CMS now to revise their memorandum and not allow that, because you're not going to have the quality if the nurses don't understand the laboratory and the work we do.
So if you might do me a favor, if you have some information, this is a perfect example of an issue that I haven't been well aware of, and if Jens will hold on to that, make sure to share with me later. And thanks for bringing it to my attention. It might surprise you that I'm a candidate for public office that doesn't know everything. And that's why I rely on you, everybody. I need to be educated, and thanks for doing so. And I'll make a point of, and if you leave your contact information, we'll be sure to let you know when we take a look into it. Yes, in the back.
I just wanted to say I agree with you. I am a BSN nurse, nursing degree, law degree. I would not want to supervise a laboratory. I don't understand that. I hate chemistry. It's not a good idea. Just like I wouldn't want laboratory supervising me in the intensive care unit.
Or I wouldn't want teachers with guns. If some of you saw the news, by the way, I don't need to change the subject, if any of you saw the news, a teacher with a gun shot up a classroom today, and for reasons that are unknown, and didn't hurt anybody. But
It was empty.
It was empty. The classroom was empty.
Yes.
Yeah. Close the door.
Yeah.
But just. So I have to be in my car in 10 minutes. I was hoping to mingle, but let's keep the conversation going for a few more questions, and then I unfortunately have to make right here.
Okay, so I'm looking at the demographic in this room. I'm wondering what.
It's youthful.
What do to generate interest from the younger generation?
There you go. So the question is, what can I do to generate interest from the younger generation? I'll tell you, the best news is that we have what we call the Dean's List, is a group of young people in high schools throughout the 3rd District who are mobilized, energized, organized, and providing, I gotta tell you, this is really interesting, everybody. And of course, I've got policy consultants, everybody from Richard Painter, who's advising me on campaign finance reform, Andy Slavitt on healthcare reform. We also convened a group of young people earlier this year, actually at the end of last year, and asked them to do policy research in about 8 different policy areas. And I'll tell you, the work product I got back from late high school, early college students was remarkable, and better, and objective, more objective than a lot of what you get from the professionals. And we've seen the value in what young people can do, and I'm seeing the value in what young people are doing this very moment, getting ready to march on Washington and demand change, because if Congress can't make changes to protect young people are gonna make changes to Congress, and I'm all behind them. Yes, in this room, I think you're all young people, but not many high schoolers in this room, that's what I'm trying to say. I recognize that, and a lot of young people don't come to events like this. They're at the end of school or at sports, or they're at home doing homework. But I'll tell you, there is a massive mobilization of young people going on right now generally, and specifically on this campaign, and I think they're going to make a big difference, because a group of 10 high schoolers has the social media reach of everybody in this room collectively. And even the 16, 17-year-olds that can't yet vote, they often go home to a dinner table and can share perspective, and they can communicate, and they can disseminate, and they can activate. And we're going to utilize young people in a way that have never been done on a campaign before, and that's going to be redefining. So thank you. And then yes.
I have the same subject
of
how are we going to get people involved who don't look like me? So you covered that.
Here.
Thank you.
Yes.
The last thing, and then, I'm so moved by what happened in Alabama, but the critical thing is getting people out. And I hope that we structurally do that.
Yeah, so the question is about turnout.
Yeah.
I want to remind everybody, 35, at the last election in November of 16, the last survey that came out, 35% of this district identified themselves as Democrats, 35%. Again, I'm not a math guy, but that indicates that we have to extend invitations to independents and moderate Republicans, particularly moderate Republicans who feel disenfranchised by the direction that their party is taking. And that means mobilizing Democrats too, of course. I can tell you from doing this every day for the last 10 months, well, I can tell you from looking at this room, there's something happening. And it's going to be a great, great legacy in this November, because I think it's going to happen. It's going to happen organically, but we are doing things that have never been done before in campaigns, using technologies, both analog and digital, and the human touch to get people out and being part of something, not just to come out and vote, but to be involved in something really important, and it's happening. But that's where all of you come in too. It's really important. If this is important to you, make it important to one other person in your social circle or your family to do the same thing. And that's the best turnout strategy we could ever come up with. Door knocking won't come close if all of you activate. This is going to be and by the way, I don't want to just win. I want it to be a landslide. Two more questions, then I gotta go, I'm sorry.
Can you just talk a little bit about your thoughts on law enforcement, especially in Minnesota?
Yeah, my thoughts on law enforcement. I want to start by saying that I deeply value law enforcement, and I've had plenty of circumstances in my life where my family and I have had to rely on thoughtful service, and I think there are some in this country that fail to recognize the sacrifice and service of many in law enforcement. I also recognize that in many communities there are some terrible problems in both training, in law enforcement forces that don't represent the communities, the backgrounds of the communities in which they serve. I just met with one of the chiefs in the district and had one of the most remarkable conversations I've had since I've run for office, with some very thoughtful prescriptions for change. And this is someone who said he's actually tried to visit with Eric Paulson on a number of occasions and hasn't even had a chance to express to him what he thinks needs to be done. We had a really gratifying conversation. I do think this is it's leadership and it's training. And these are just truths. And I do think they should, in general, they should represent the communities that they serve and have an understanding of that shared life experience. The criminal justice system, I think, should be wrapped into this answer too, because we have some deficiencies in both our penal system, which is not a rehabilitation system, it's a penal system. We have hundreds of thousands of people sitting in jail cells for selling small amounts of cannabis, where 100,000 more are getting rich doing the same thing in legal states. And it's just nonsensical. It's nonsensical that even cannabis is a Schedule I drug in this country, grouped with heroin and cocaine and the like. So we have a lot of reflecting to do. But I want to be a leader who recognizes the sacrifices and service of those in law enforcement, and having systems and processes to weed out those who are not worthy of that service, to encourage service amongst those young people who would be wonderful public servants, and most importantly, to ensure that the leadership of our law enforcement departments around this entire country are qualified, principled, and just. And that's how change begins. And the dynamics in the 5th district are, of course, very different than those in the 3rd, but these problems are all over the country. And I think I'm cognizant of both. One more question. Okay.
Corey Bussey, I live here in Bloomington. You talk a lot about strategy. So bring it home, because in an election year where not being Eric Paulson is a good thing, it's not everything. So what is the strategy to send him home?
The strategy is to get more votes than him on November 6th. You know, this is a very funny business because you just want 50.1% market share on one day, and you want no money left in the bank. It's a very strange pursuit for someone who's been in business most of his life. But our strategy is actually a really clear and compelling one, which is first and foremost doing what Eric Paulson does. Showing up. You know, I think I've done more public appearances this week than Eric Paulson has done in 6 years. In 6 days, I've done more than he's done in 6 years. That's one. And if I do this every single day and night for the next 9 months, that's going to affect some change. But look, I'm just a candidate. You know, this is a campaign, everybody. The strategy is you. The strategy is less me. The strategy is all you. And that's why I do this every day that I possibly can, is to make connections, to shake hands, have a conversation to the extent that I can, and encourage people to recognize that that's what a campaign is. It's not just the candidate, it's all of you. We're going to have the most remarkable content. We're going to have the most remarkable digital strategies. We're going to have the most remarkable experiential strategies. Having an ice shack on Lake Minnetonka. We've had hundreds and hundreds of people, Democrats, Republicans, and Libertarians, Independents, show up at the shack, have a cup of coffee with me, and sit down and do a little ice fishing. I drive my little truck around, doing the same thing. That truck generates conversation. We're going to tow that little ice shack that's now hopefully not sinking on Lake Minnetonka. It's a whole other story. We built it on a drop-down trailer, so we're going to tow it off the lake probably sooner than we expected, and we're going to drive that to every single one of the towns, villages, and townships in the entire 3rd district and open an office for maybe a week at a time, so that we're going to bring the campaign and the candidate and the campaign office to people. Because I think that's a responsibility of representation. You should not have to try to find your elected official, your elected congressman in this case. You know, he or she should find you and show up and invite people. So this is a candidacy about invitations more than anything else. That is our strategy, is to extend invitations. You may not vote for me, but at the end of the day, I promise you, everybody in the 3rd district will have received an invitation to at least come see, come talk, and be listened to. And that, in my estimation, is what this country needs. I hope it's rewarded with success in November. And if it does, the 3rd district is going to be recognized as in this entire country for being one of the most important races, which it is already, but also redefining how a campaign can be run and really how much fun it is. And if we can bring a little bit of that back and convert frowns to smiles, because a frown is just a smile turned upside down, we will have achieved something that never would have been possible without the wake-up call that we got in November of 2016. So, I close by, I want to say 2 things. I'm going to close with a quotation from my great-grandfather, J. Phillips, who we just spoke of, who would tell me every time I was in the office with him together, he would say, "Dean, money is like manure. If you stack it up, it stinks. And if you spread it out, it fertilizes." And that's the lens through which I view just about everything when it comes to affecting human lives in this country. I don't think government can affect all the change we need, but I do think government should provide thoughtful incentives and encourage more sharing, more investing in people and small enterprises and in people's lives. And that's something we all can do together. That's the lens through which I view policy in this country, is spreading it out. Because we all, as Paul Wellstone said, we all do better when we all do better. And that's who I am. I honor him, his legacy, and many before him as well. So I want to say thank you. Every time I do one of these, I leave smiling, I don't know if you can tell. I wish my face was wider to accommodate my smile. I'm grateful to all of you. This is the hardest thing I've ever done in my life, but it's also the most joyful, and it's because of all of you, and I can't wait to celebrate together in November and convert that anxiety that we all felt and probably all feel to some degree into something extraordinary, rewarding, and legacy making. So thank you, and love to have you join the group. I have to run right now, but if anybody wants to come to our campaign repair shack, the ice shack on Lake Minnetonka, I'll be there from 12 to 2 on Sunday, hanging out, serving coffee.
Port of Excelsior.
Port of Excelsior. Bye, everybody.
As long as it doesn't sink between now and then.
I know. Like 5 degrees, 5 days in a row, 40 plus.
Yeah. Luckily, the ice is 3 feet thick.